Attention, please. Eastern Airlines Flight 19, now ready for departure.
Welcome aboard the Walt Disney World Express monorail. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're entering the vacation kingdom of the world.
There's enough land here to hold all the ideas and plans we could possibly imagine. We call it EPCOT. Will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow.
Welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast, taking you back to the vacation kingdom of the world, the way it was, and the way it is in your memories.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Retro Disney World Podcast, the official podcast of the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society. This is episode 56.5, a chat with Gene Brignola, typical pylons, and we'll tell you what that means in just a moment. Sitting in with me as always, Mr. JT Kuger from Ohio. How you doing tonight, JT?
Good evening, good day, everybody. I'm excited about this one. This is going to be a good one.
This is going to, a lot of people are going to be excited about this. I couldn't wait to talk to Gene, so this is going to be great. Hal coming in from Tampa, wearing a very appropriate shirt. We won't say what it is just yet. Well, we can say it's an Atari logo. They'll give a hint there. So, how's it going tonight, Hal?
Good. How you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good. And coming in from the city of brotherly love, Mr. Brian P. Miles. How's it going tonight?
Greetings and salutations. I can't wait to hang out with my neighbor, Gene.
That's right. Local.
Right.
So coming in as Brian's neighbor, please welcome to the show, Gene Brignola. He is a designer, creator, fabricator, author, classic car builder, has his own design studio, and he's responsible for something called Typical Pylons, which we're going to get to in just a moment here. So without further ado, Gene, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So let's let our listeners know what typical pylons are. It is a historical artifact in a way. It is something we've replicated. It goes back to EPCOT, to the early 80s and the original park opening. And it's something that they're bringing back. So, Gene, I'm going to let you tell the listeners, what is a typical pylon?
A typical pylon, it was at the time the largest single pour of acrylic, clear acrylic, or known as plexiglass, that had ever been manufactured to fit in front of Spaceship Earth at EPCOT as part of their fountain.
And there you go, folks. So for those interested, we've got Gene, the designer and fabricator behind the wonderful fountain in front of Spaceship Earth, and we're going to talk to him all about that tonight. So, Gene, maybe before we get into the details at EPCOT, maybe a little background of how you got into that, how you got to work with Disney, and how'd you get there? Because I'm sure there's a story that goes with it.
Oh, there's a crazy story to go with this. At the time, I was working to help move the Philadelphia Art Museum prior to the bicentennial. And as the contract was ending, the gentleman who was a good friend of mine and my boss at the time said, we're going to end this contract. And he says, Disney is building this city in Florida. And because of your engineering background, maybe you should go down there and pitch them on selling merchandise or designing merchandise in space age materials. He knew that I was an Embry-Riddle graduate engineer, aerospace engineer that had a specialty in synthetic material applications. So I listened to what he had to say, and as our contract ended, I jumped on a flight and flew down to Disney and knocked on a door at merchandising, and they said to me, yes, we're looking for merchandising. We really don't know what we want, but the gentleman that I met was very, very interesting. He was a retired Marine, and I had a ponytail down to the middle of my back. So surprising that we hit it off because he also had a rock band. He told me that he had a $43 million contract, and if I was to come back with some samples or something of what I could do, he would entertain the possibility on bringing me into the fold as they were starting to really build out the property. I came back to Philadelphia. Didn't have the kind of money that it would take to build a studio at the time. I went around to the production laboratories at Roman Haas that made the material, started to talk to them because I knew that EPCOT was going to be futuristic. I'm an old Disney fan. And I was trying to figure it out. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do or how I wanted to go about it, but I went back to my friend's loft, which was right near the Philadelphia Art Museum, and we were trying to decide on which direction I should go in. And a gentleman came from Roman Haas and dropped off 200 pounds of scrap acrylic, just gave it to me. So we started messing with it and started cutting it up, and he had a fairly good shop. And I built a miniature city. I would say that it was probably 3.5 to 4 feet long, 1.5 feet high, and maybe 2 feet wide. And it was fully electrified. I was using miniature LEDs before everybody even knew what LEDs were. Tiny, tiny microchips. And I built this little city that was actually active. I put it in a box, and the funny story about this was I bought a seat for it on the airplane. And myself and my good friend flew to Florida. Well, as we were rolling it through the Orlando airport, there happened to be a TV crew there, and they wanted to know what we were doing. And we said, we're entertaining a possibility to work for Disney. They asked us to come down and show us what we could do, and we brought this miniature city. So they did a 11 o'clock special about these two characters from Philadelphia with this big box that was going to meet Disney. Well, when we went to the meeting, the Disney people already saw the television show and couldn't wait to open the box. They opened the box, they saw what we did, and they said, okay, here's what we'll do. Everything that they saw, they liked. They said, you come back with 6 to 8 pieces that we can sell at these price points in 6 weeks, and I'll write you the guy said he'd write me a contract.
Wow.
Home we went. Another friend of mine who realized what we were doing, his father was a real estate broker, had a fistful of money, and said, if you bring my son in as a partner, I'll give you all the money you need and a facility. And $48,000 later, and a ton of brand new equipment, we made 8 prototypes, and I flew by myself back down to Disney. Unfolded them on the table in front of about 15 people. Next thing I know, I was signing a contract. So That's how it all began.
And these items were all made out of acrylic? They were paperweights and things?
No, they were, we were calling them designer gifts. So they were, I'll have to get some pictures for you guys, but they were, let me see if I give you an example. Picture a block of acrylic that's 6 inches long by 2 inches square. And inside of it was a spaceport with flying saucers and things and a landing strip. And the term that I was calling when you looked at the bottom of it was the material, by removing material, created an image inside. So it was by removing material that created a 3D image. We were calling it something from nothing. And Disney just loved the deal. And not only did we start with 8, we started to make 20 or 30 more. Even before EPCOT was open, they were selling them in Disneyland. They were asking for different ideas. We were coming up with different pieces. In fact, as we went along, they started to talk to me about designing some big, large pieces. In fact, the Pylons were only one of them. Another piece I did was called Music for Your Eyes. That's set up in the Centurium, which was the building that was directly behind Spaceship Earth. That was their first introduction to the new merchandise that was going to be sold in the park. The spaceships and things that I did prior to EPCOT, they pushed right through Tomorrowland, and they were selling them up front, getting ready for EPCOT to open. So we made some significant things. In fact, when the Disney Village, after the first week, there was a place in there called the Captain's Table or something like that in the center of Disney Village. They had me bring a tractor trailer down with all of my laser equipment, and I set up right inside Captain's Tower. I set up right in front of the Captain's Tower so that people could actually watch us make the pieces on site, on property.
Wow.
How do you
That was
remember these things for sale? What Gene's describing, or do you remember any of this in the Captain's Tower?
So I did see some photos, and yes, I do remember those items out for sale everywhere because it was they were. Now I didn't know it was done with lasers. That's awesome. I was going to ask if you used routers and how you managed to duplicate it.
Some of them were done with high-speed 50,000 RPM diamond setting tools. Some of them were done with lasers, and through this whole introduction to Disney and stuff, I got to become very good friends with the Arribas brothers.
Okay.
And Tomas Arribas was my mentor. He and I hit it off. We did everything together. It was kind of cool. You know, in fact, when he passed away, I had my family at Disney, and I always went into the village area and into one of his stores. And I walked in and I said, "Is Tomas here?" And this woman turned white and said he passed away in Spain, and that freaked me right out. That was a bad day.
That was such a shame. I mean, I'm sure he lived a long, rich life, but wow, what a legacy that guy had.
Oh yeah, he also owned a glider. We went up in a glider he had.
Oh,
that was pretty cool. Oh yeah, I made him a glass glider as a birthday present one year.
That's great.
That's cool. So none of those products were branded as Disney or Epcot then at that point?
No,
they were all generic?
I signed every one of them backwards and upside down. So when you look through the piece, you could actually see my name and the date.
So that comes in handy, writing checks in the mirror, I guess.
Leonardo da Vinci.
There we go.
Yeah. I mean, these really were, in a way, art pieces, like individually made. It's like they weren't mass produced. So I think it's great that you signed them because it's wholly appropriate, in my opinion.
Thousands. Thousands. Well,
what was that? How long did they take to make? Like, what was like the average?
Well, each one's all different. So what I did was I had when I had this facility set up, the people that I recruited to work with me, since I had experience of being in the music industry out west after I left engineering, and I realized that I could get all of these part-time musicians that were really creative to work for me, because they also had weird hours. You know, they worked till 2 a.m. playing music, and I'd have them come in at noon or something, and they'd work till 8. So I had these scattered shifts of all of these friends, these young musicians, and they made all of the blanks. So after the blanks were made, it went through 3 or 4 steps before it came to my area where I set it up to carve them. And we would do 1,000 in a run. We just set up, get all the blanks lined up, and they would just keep making them, and I'd keep running them through these machines, hand signing them, doing the finish work on them. It got to become a really unique process. Plus, it was a pretty crazy crew. I mean, we did all kinds of things. We didn't just work for Disney. We made T-shirts for like Springsteen and Miami Steve and Grateful Dead and all kinds of crazy things. So it was a very unique design studio. It wouldn't be the kind that would be like so regimented. We were unique in what we did, and I think that's what kept the ideas fresh. And that's what Disney liked. They saw different things that they couldn't find anywhere else.
Now, what did the Disney sell those for? Does anybody recall how, Gene?
The castles I did a vertical castle that looked like Cinderella's castle called Castle on a Mountain, and they were selling for under $30. I think the price point was like $25. I also did another piece for the Haunted Mansion, which was a set of ghostly hands inside of a block playing a keyboard, so it looked like they floated.
Oh,
inside
sweet.
this block. And I think they were $15. And they were 2 inches by an inch by an inch.
Okay. Wow. So did we run the inflation calculator on that one, Brian, while you were in there?
Oh. What year was it?
Well, when I first went to them was 1978. So
Okay.
by 79, they were running pieces through Tomorrowland and Disneyland. By the time we opened Epcot, we were doing some bigger pieces. We also did these large acrylic sailboats with floating sails and things that if you go on eBay every once in a while, you'll see all the copycats that copied us. It used to make me laugh because my lawyer goes, "You can't sue them because they don't make enough money."
Well, a $30 castle in 1978 would be $120 now.
Okay,
Wow.
actually, I was actually thinking about selling them back to these guys for like $30 a piece because I can make them that quick.
Yeah.
Wow.
There you go.
You know, but like I said, I'm more interested in the fountain because
Yeah. So
I know-
how'd you get to
I
there?
know I can do it better and faster and higher quality than anybody else. I've seen work done other places, and plus I have all the specs.
It would be neat to see that revitalized again. I know that haunted. Now I got to look for that haunted mansion piece because that would be a rare.
That would be
treat
cool to
find.
see, yeah.
Hold on a second. Let me see if I have one. I'm looking
Just
around.
got it. Just,
I got it.
Oh, it's-
You're a good man, Gene. You kept everything you made.
Oh,
There you go.
look at that!
That's it.
Oh my gosh! I swear I
it's a
remember
pair of
that.
hands. Look at that.
Yeah, the hands on the keyboard.
So you
Oh,
can't
and
see
the
it, but it's a pair of
And
skeletal
it's done
hands.
through these two little holes in the back.
Wow!
So in the back of the hands, it's. There you go.
that's awesome.
Amazing.
Well, I've got tons of pieces. I got pieces everywhere. In fact, when I told Todd that I had the logos for the fountains, these are the logo strips.
Look at that.
No, wow.
They're a special material that when you put them on acrylic, you can't get it off. And that was what Disney wanted. They wanted to make sure that their logos were secure.
That they wouldn't. Wow. So it's like super glue of logos.
They're super thin. They're made of what do you call a high-tech mylar.
Mhm.
That's like, God, I don't even know the thickness. I remember we measured the thickness because they wanted them so when you ran your hand over top of the pylons, you wouldn't even feel them.
So super thin, super durable.
Oh yeah, can't get them off. Actually, I was running around Disney one day sticking them on everything. I had boxes of them.
That's awesome. The question I want to ask next is, so how did this transition from making these little trinkets into the fountain that we know and love today?
They had a plan. They had a plan for the fountain. They built the fountain. They had a designer. What was his name? Macarari. Anyway, they were looking for design elements. They had a design. I altered the design, changed it a little. They went back and forth. They wanted them. You know what first of all, do you know what the pylons are? Does anybody know what the pylons really are?
No.
Oh, so they represent something? Uh-huh.
I will give you the trick. I learned this having been there. If Walt put his finger on it, they would buy it no matter what it was. So if you look at the pylons in the negative, don't look at them as solids, look at them in the negative. They come from Frontierland. They are standing rifles,
Oh.
muskets, high-tech muskets.
Huh.
That's not expected.
Wow.
Why muskets? Because Walt?
Because Walt loved Frontierland. It was he loved it. So it looks like standing rifles
way
over fire.
Yeah.
Just like, that's it. Just like Frontierland.
How about that?
Yeah,
I
that's
never
the
would have
trick.
thought.
Nobody knew it.
I thought it was the promise of the future curve, you know.
No, we
In
went
fact,
backwards.
When I did the music for your eyes piece for the Centaurium, which were glass panels that had sequences, bars of color, translucent colors, that when you walked by it, they went up and down like music notes.
Oh, wow.
So, and I got that idea from going through the Disney Museum, and Walt had done a drawing of this paneling sequence that when you walked by it, it moved. And I went, oh, this is great. This is great. But to do it in a cylindrical base, and these panels were interwoven among themselves. So when they had it really high up, so when you walked around the counters, it was like a centerpiece. When you walked around the counters and you looked up, it was lit. These colored panels looked like they went up and down like notes in a music score.
Oh, cool.
But it was really you moving. The piece didn't move. It was pretty cool.
That's amazing.
So standing rifles, gentlemen.
So standing rifles is where we got the what's the word I'm
Concept.
looking for? The concept, yeah. So how did it go from concept to reality or design? I know you're sitting there with the blueprints in front of us, so we were like, you know, our mouths are agape right now.
Acrylic was the deal right then. They wanted it futuristic. They didn't want to do it in anything else. The people that I knew in California were these enormous fish tank manufacturers. They did Mandalay Bay. They did the one in Beijing, which was like 80 feet long, single panel acrylic, 6 inches thick. They had autoclaves to do it, but they never did anything other than flat or curved sheets. So this was a challenge for them, a real challenge for them. The only problem that Disney had was they weren't hip to the fact that the heat from those enormous lights under each one of them, the heat wasn't evacuated. So as you know from being in Florida, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it rains, temperature changes, humidity goes up and down. Methacrylate, which is the material, it's a 2-part, never totally cures. It's always, because the other thing too was, because they had to mix it in batches and lay it on top of each other, some of the batches, because of the weights and the amounts they would pour, were maybe a little off. And when that heat got to them, they call it kicking. The material started to kick again. And on opening day, when I walked by that first pylon and saw the first crack, I called head of operations. My wife thought I was nuts. I called head of operations and said, I think we have a problem here. And he wanted to know what it was. I said, if that crack runs, acrylic has the tendency, because of the changes in weather, to split. And if that thing splits, you're going to take out 50 guests sitting on the edge of that fountain when that thing comes down. That night, they pulled that sucker out and put a new one in.
Oh my God.
They were fast.
You saw that opening day you were there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize. Yeah, I walked by. I'd been there a couple of days earlier, but when I walked by, I didn't. Must have been the light or something. I just caught it, and I caught it on the very bottom of it. It wasn't climbing or anything at the time I saw it. It was maybe 1/4 inch or so, but I saw it, and I was trying to figure out what it was. The challenge that I had with them was they brought some young gal engineer out there with an infrared heat gun trying to measure it. And I was on the phone with Corning Glass, one of my mentors who actually worked for Roman Haas's PPL labs. And I said, this is what I see. What do you think? What do you think? And they said, it's kicking. And then I called the guy who manufactured it. And he told me, he says, we poured it in layers. This is unheard of before. But when I told him it had like 1,000-watt light bulbs under it, he was in a panic. Even though they disputed what I said it's because it's kicking. They gave me some. I actually have the report. So this 21, 22-year-old gal told me that I didn't know what I was talking about. And I called Corning Glass, and Corning sent down 6-inch pieces of radiant glass to put between the lights and the pylons to keep them from cracking, to absorb the heat.
Wow.
But Disney was really like, they were a little, to me, I thought they were a little obnoxious to have this. I mean, I had an engineering degree, 5 years in aerospace engineering, and these guys are telling me that this young girl knew what she was talking about, having never worked in the material before. I was a little taken back by it, but I let them do their little thing and their little report, but they still put the glass in between the lights and the pylons because they couldn't evacuate the air. They didn't have any fans or anything in there. And because we weren't privy to how the fountain was going to be built other than the plans, it just shows light panels. It don't say 1,000-watt lights. Right. It shows where the water inlets are and things like that, and how deep these pylons were going to go in order to be stable. But the heat problem was something nobody anticipated with the changes in weather. I mean, it was, the material gets hot, it gets cold, and then they blast it with this heat from below. It was taking on some strange characteristics that nobody was familiar with.
So you're saying opening day that happened, and then they came that night and pulled it out. Which one was it? Like, do you recall which of the three?
Yeah, hold on. Just let me think for a second. I'm looking for my other pylon. Oh, here it is. Let me see the way this thing was set up. It was when you walked up. It was the first one on the left.
From main entrance, you're saying?
Yeah, when you walked up from the monorail around to the left side of Heichel's Plaza, it was the first one on the left. So
I didn't know the plaza had a name.
Wait, what did you just call that plaza?
The guy that created it, I'm trying to remember his name. I can go pull it out of my records. But in fact, if you guys hang, I might have the letter here.
Do you mean John Hench?
Hench. That's him.
So they called that Hench's Plaza?
Yeah.
Wow.
In fact, that was my big argument when I wrote to Iger. I said, get those dumb tombstones out of there. It's screwing up the beauty of that plaza. When you got off the monorail, you saw those stupid tombstones, the labyrinth, which also interfered with the ability for people to get into the park. It created that confusion of the opening entrance. The whole thing was supposed to open up to the entrance of Spaceship Earth as an awakening. And then they go and block it with those tombstones.
So were you there the evening they pulled it out, like to supervise, or no?
Oh no, I didn't. The thing that's strange about Disney now is anytime that I was there and they had to do something, they waited till everybody was out of the park and they brought cranes in like rocket ships. Now the place looks like a construction site. I mean, they're doing it day and night now, which they never did that before. Everything was done as if, it was perfect all the time.
How deep, you're saying, we've heard stories, how deep did they go?
The pylons?
Yeah.
Let me look.
I love we get the rustle of paper and everything.
Yeah.
Well, 1 foot 8 inches times, what did I say? That's the plan size. So it's 1 foot to an inch.
Yep.
So 12 inches times that, and a little over a foot or so, for sure.
Because you need something for that anchor to hold on to.
And they used the glue around it.
That's what was my next question is how did they anchor that together?
Yeah, they used a sealer around it because the way the fountain was created, it was created with these staggered porcelain tiles.
Mm-hmm.
What did they call it? Let's see, flush floor. I mean, I even have the terrazzo divider strips in here. Okay, so the light recess, 7 inches elevation. Here's the way it was set in. I'll show you the picture. If you can see it. That's where they went into that hole.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So that little, did they kind of go into that?
Oh.
No, they just slid straight down.
Straight down. So that was enough
Straight
with
down.
the weight and that design that they would kind of just sit in there and then seal it in kind of around the edge.
The weight was, I think, 2,700 pounds.
Each one?
Wow.
Yeah, either 1,400 or 2,700. I'm trying to remember which it was without trying to dig it out here.
Now, were you there for the install at all, or no?
I was there for one of the installs. The minute I saw one went in, I was good.
How did they do that? How did they hold? I was like, my first thought is like, however they attach that thing, they're going to scratch it. Like, it just seems like.
No, they had this thing. They had this thing wrapped with shipping blankets and ropes and all kinds of garbage. They dropped it in with a crane, and there was like a dozen people up there trying to get it straight because it had a tendency of wanting to rotate. Because as you guys have seen, the shape of the thing, it's not perfect. It's not like a tongue depressor. It's got these angles in the back, and it's angled at the top, so it has a tendency to want to slide out. So they had this thing wrapped up pretty doggone well. In fact, in the warehouses, they had the pylons on these rollers, like a roller table. So they had, when they first got them, when they were shipped in, they were put up on these roller tables so that they could unwrap them and clean them and stuff like that. But the material is super slippery. So they were challenged when they first started to decide who and how they were going to drop them in. I know it was challenging.
Sure. I'll talk about the logos on top. We were discussing that earlier. So there was, we all know the EPCOT logo was at the top. How was that? Was that etched in, or what was that?
They etched that in. I'm looking for which one am I at? I'm at the area development. Looking for the actual pylon section to where it says what they were doing with it. I had it open before because I was looking. There's the logo.
Oh, there you go.
And if you see, it says 1/4 inch black acrylic where the words are. So that was their goal at first. And like I said, the reflections kind of like put them into a bind because, the upper logo was supposed to be violet, and it was supposed to be violet.
To match the EPCOT purple. Okay.
Yeah, violet plexiglass 2287 adhesively applied to cast acrylic face. That's the way they were going to try to do it. So.
So then you're saying that messed with the light refraction, all that just looked bad.
Yeah. Plus, when they realized that they were going to put colored lights under it, it lost its effect. So they realized, hey, let's put it in white, and then the colors behind the acrylic as it lights up from the bottom and changes will give it a more dramatic and clean effect. Mm-hmm. Black would have been, or violet would have been horrendous. I mean, I can't imagine violet logos.
And that's interesting that they ended up leaving the name off of it and just doing the pictorial part without the words on there.
Well, they have this crazy thing about these committees. When they do this committee, they all sit around and talk about it, and then somebody makes a final decision, or somebody chimes in and says, "Did you really think about that?" And like with a couple of the things, even with the when they realized that it was cracked. At first, I didn't think they were going to do anything, and then all of a sudden, I guess whoever went back and started to have the discussion with the operations people, the thought was, because I told them, I said, listen, I've seen experiences where I've had small pieces of acrylic and it gets a little bit of water in that crack and it expands, and then all of a sudden it just snaps. I mean, it makes this big noise, like it pops. In the studio, I had a couple of pieces, even in some other areas, that we were just sitting having lunch one day, and a piece had fallen into water earlier, and we had it sitting up on a shelf, and all of a sudden it just snapped. Scared the living heck out of us. But I thought about a 1,400-pound one coming down along that fountain, because I still believe that that's the best photo op ever. And that's why I want to do another fountain for them. But in the front of it, I want to put a place where they can slide a photo in, the photo that they took of themselves in front of the fountain.
So I think you said that you gave us a little bit about the price. How many? So they poured some backup pylons just in case something like that happened?
Yeah, they poured, I think, 2 extra at first. I think they poured 2 extra at first, and then the one went cracked, and they removed it. And I think they called my friend up and they ordered another one. And that's when all of a sudden they started going up about the price.
Right.
Because he realized that it cost him more than you do things for Disney and you want to give them something good, and you negotiate the price and you give it to them a little low, but you have business with them. All of a sudden they came back to him and he jacked the price. I mean, I know he had to.
Right.
I mean, I just saw the work that it took to put this thing, to bed, as we call it. It took them a long time. The pours were unique. You couldn't just pour them flat because you had to pour them at an angle. I mean, and then you had to polish them. So it was a challenge for the what do you call manufacturer, something he'd never done before.
Right.
Like I said, he was just doing fish tanks, big ones. I was going to say he did the pours for the Seas Pavilion too.
Oh, nice. Oh, for all those
6 inches
panels.
thick. Trying to think of how much those suckers weighed. I know they weighed a lot, but I mean, it was his forte. It's what he always did.
Yep.
And like I said, his autoclaves, you could put a house in.
Wow.
They were enormous.
Now, do you know how does the pouring process work? I imagine that you can only mix up a certain amount of this acrylic resin at a time. Do you pour it in and then pour a next amount, or do they just mix a massive amount and pour it in one and let it cure? Or how does it all work? And the autoclave, I assume, vacuum, it gets the bubbles out and all that. So
right,
sorry, go.
So it was a multiple pour. I'm trying to remember which way they poured it first. They poured it up to the first angle, and then they stopped because they wanted to see if it was going to cure. So they poured one layer down, which is pretty thick. Had to be, I can't even imagine. It had to be 400 or 500 pounds of 2-part methacrylate. Then you have to mix it. That was the challenge. The challenge is mixing that amount. Even with big, enormous mixers, they have to mix it. Then when they pour it, they have to pour it and they let it stay, put it on a vibrating table, these big vibrating tables to vibrate the big bubbles out. Mm-hmm. And then they throw it in an autoclave. And what they did was they autoclaved it and then they poured a second layer on or a third layer on and autoclaved it again and again. And that's what I think it was the major cause where the splits took place, where the cracks began. Because after they pour it, they grind it. So what they did was they had to grind the bases, and that's where the cracks started to get them perfectly flat. And I know that he wasn't aware that the that these lights were going to be there. He just thought they were going to go into the frame that they gave him a cross section of, and he designed the bases to fit into that frame. And when they ground them flat at the bottom and polished them, it definitely caused a problem, because you have to understand, when you're polishing and grinding, you're creating heat again. So if you're familiar with metal, where you anneal it by heating it and softening it, after they ground it, they didn't stick it back in the autoclave. They ground it and polished it, and they were sending it out the door. Gotcha. Maybe if they would have put it back in the autoclave, it would have annealed it and made it hard, and therefore it would have cured a little bit more. But they didn't. I know he didn't anticipate them cracking, because when I went out there a few years later to have him build an enormous fish tank for one of my clients, we were having a discussion about the cracking and stuff, and he wasn't too happy about it. And he wasn't too happy about the fact that they wanted more of them, and they were giving him a lot of grief about the price.
So on the pour, I find it amazing that they can do it in sections and still maintain some level of clarity and not being able to see that line. So when you do the second pour, even though it's clear, it's cured, is there some chemical reaction that's bonding to the one that's cured already to help fade those lines, or is it through polishing? Okay. How does that work?
Okay, I'll explain to you. What they do is, the material, when it's mixed together, has a certain angle of refraction, and they have a meter that they can tell what this refraction number is. And the refraction number calculates down to how much resins you're mixing. So they can get the exact same reflection, let's call it number, the exact same number by mixing the right amounts of material, so that when it adheres, there's no line. Wow. You don't see a line at all. It's invisible.
So it's there on a microscopic level, maybe, but you don't even.
Yeah,
you
maybe
can't even
if he's off a little bit, but on a piece that big, if he's done his refraction numbers correctly, it's almost like holding a gun up to it. Puts out a number, the clarity number. They mix according to what it's going to take to get that number precise. Then they pour.
Wow, that's cool.
And I'll tell you, it's rough when it comes out. It comes out like white. The whole outside surfaces are like white. They're like frosted.
Wow.
So then they got to go. They do a sanding process like I would do on a car. They'll start with like maybe 400 grit and go to 4,000 grit, and then they'll
up and polish and
yeah. And it's wet. It's wet sanding. Big wet sanders. Big buffing, handheld buffing wheels. You know, they have to rotate this thing, so it's on a rotisserie, almost like you do a full restoration on a car when you take the body off. You put this thing in a rotisserie so you can rotate it as you're polishing it, rotate different sections. So you can have one guy doing one side, another guy doing another side, or one guy doing a top, one guy doing an edge. It takes a long time.
Wow.
Do you think they took pictures of that process? That would be so interesting to see one of the pylons on the rotisserie getting...
I don't think my guy took those kinds of pictures.
So I assume they would have had to have sculpted a positive of the pylon first and then made a form from that to do the pour into?
Yeah, okay. Almost like, well, in fact, I just did a big, what the heck is it? I just did a big thing the other day. What they do is they'll create either clay. I don't know what they used at the time because I never saw what their blank was.
Okay.
But they'll use clay, and then they'll pour silicone. And let me step away for a second, and I'll show you something.
Here it is, Walt's frozen head.
This here, can you see it?
Yeah.
This is a silicone mold that we're going to pour bronze in. Okay, and then what you do is after you make the silicone, you put a plaster back to it.
Okay.
So you pour a wax in here. You take the wax out of here. You take the wax and you coat it with like a concrete. It's almost like you'd make jewelry, except it's in large scale. And then you melt the wax out. Now you have the mold. So they'll pour acrylic into that mold, multiple layers, until it's the way they want it. And then they crack the concrete away from it. And now you've got a blank.
Okay.
So the blank then goes in. Yeah. So what they do when they do it in the concrete, because it's acrylic, they have to put that whole thing into the autoclave. It's not an open autoclave. They pour it into that big mold where they've removed the wax, and then fill the void with acrylic, and then stick it in an autoclave to get everything out. And it had to be done nose down, so the big thick parts at the top, So the bubbles will come to the top, and that's the part they grind off.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy.
Oh, my gosh.
And I guess this whole thing being, well, Gene, you can tell us the width of the entire base. I mean, it's amazing they can get that perfect, so much perfection in it. But it had to be what, 15 feet away from the guest and 7-8 feet up, right?
Oh yeah, at least that.
Easily.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of looking at the top of the fountain plan. Manhole cover in the middle, water pipe inlets. What is that? The blueprint's too big to open. It's like, whoa. Elevation, 102 inches. Well, just the pit that the pylon fit in, the base of the pit that it fell in was 99.57 was the elevation, and it went up to 103 elevation to the top of the pit. To where, if you remember the fountain, it angled down a little. It angled down like this a little bit. So you're looking at probably a drop of about 2 to 3 feet.
Okay.
That angle, that tilted ceramic tile top had. It looked like almost like a mushroom top, because then it rolled over, and then that's where the water came out.
Huge. That's like 8.5 feet tall is the 103. I just did a little quick math. Because I stink at math, so I had to figure it out for myself. I can't do it in my head.
Yeah, I mean, the fountain itself, like I said, when they put that fountain that's in that one that they now removed, that the one that was in there, I couldn't imagine why they just didn't leave the old one in and do whatever they wanted to do to it. They could have just taken off the tile, but instead they built that other thing and removed that whole tiled fountain, and now they're going to go put it back in again, which is, I don't understand the logic, but I guess they're going retro pretty much now.
We were told that the pylons themselves had kind of faded and discolored over time, and they they didn't want to pay to replace them. So
yeah, I know they didn't want to replace them.
That's why they took them out and
like
just left the base
from
there.
The sun.
Well, see,
that was
I didn't see them yellow. If anything, the challenge may have been that they were, because they're VU protected. I mean, when you're doing acrylic, you're pouring this VU protector. So if there was any yellowing, it was surface yellowing. And I know it would have been a real pain for them to have to polish them in place, because they would have probably had to go through that sanding technique to get that surface layer off. Okay, that little guy here, 1987. Does it look yellow to you?
No, it does not.
Not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Not at all. Yeah. So in fact, this one was made in 80, and it's not yellow.
Look at that. It's perfect.
I have a problem with that excuse. I think the excuse is $54,000 for a pylon when the first one cost 14 is a little prohibitive.
And now they're probably paying $108,000 each.
Well, in fact, I'm waiting. I'm going to wait a little bit before I call my friend out west and ask him, "Are you making the pylon?" Because he'll tell me.
We'd love to know that. I was going to say, you're probably the guy who could find the guy who's making it. And
I know I'm 90% sure I know who's making it. He could probably give them the most inexpensive price, and having been through it before, he'll know the shortcuts to get it right.
Now, what's the process on that? Like, say Disney decides, January we want to go with you. How long does this whole thing take him to deliver a finished product to Disney? Nowadays? Well,
it depends if he has jobs in place, because like I said, he does these humongous fish tanks.
I'm more like spitballing here because I'm curious. Every time I see an aerial shot, 3 to 4 months, maybe. We see these holes in the fountain now, and I'm just waiting for the next picture from Bio Reconstruct to be a pylon sitting in there or something.
Are the pictures, are they triangular? The holes?
Yes. See, and that's the thing, though. I couldn't tell, and you guys probably know this as much as Gene does. Aren't those? I thought those were the old holes. They just took the cap off.
I thought they removed that whole fountain and put a new fountain in there.
No, the base is original. The base remained original.
So the triangle holes we're seeing in the current aerial photos, those are original holes.
That would be correct.
Okay.
Okay, interesting.
Because it seems to me that they just kind of put a plate over it and tiled over it and called it a day.
And so what they're doing now is there's some ornate stone tile work being done. We've seen glimpses of it, and they've been actually covering it with some old carpet, unused carpet from one of the resorts, believe it or not, so people can't see what the design is.
You think they would have put a much higher wall over that area because, with the monorail.
I mean, how high?
I guess
can
with the
you
monorail,
go?
you can't. Yeah, you can't. So.
I mean, you don't want to ruin the view of Spaceship Earth. So, as you
So
come
if they're
into
the same
park,
holes, they can only do so much then with the shape and everything on the
They
bottom.
should have just put flowers in there temporarily. Instead of a carpet.
What other? I know you did a lot of other Epcot items too. What other things did you do there, Gene? Did anything else make it into the shops after the park opened?
Oh yeah, I did a lot of these spaceship things that I did. Actually, one of my friends, I have a friend who is a Disney artist who travels to all the Comic-Cons, and he told me that I should go back and start to do designs of the new areas by putting some of the new Star Wars type designs in the spaceport concept idea, and just reproduce some of the things, the Millennial Falcon and stuff like that, sitting on the ground next to that little area that they built in there, and just reproduce some of the things that exist there, so that when people as merchandising can take them home, it's like being there again. They can actually look at them instead of doing designs that I created, to go more at doing the things that they did and making pieces that represent things that you would see as a guest and you want to bring home.
You visited the Centaurium a lot. I'm wondering if some of Gene's stuff showed up in the Centaurium and also in the Walt Disney World product catalogs or gift catalogs, because I just, that was a big time for acrylic type stuff. So do you know if anything was sold there, Gene, and how? Do you remember seeing anything?
I never looked at their catalog. I know that they were constantly ordering. Tomorrowland was selling out of the spaceship pieces and the castles on the mountain and the little keyboards, and there were other things. Trying to think of some of the other things that we did. We did these vertical triangle pieces that on one side had a tree that had no leaves on it, and on the other side had trees with like cherry blossoms on it. And when you looked at it through the center, it looked like acres and acres of trees going back. It creates double reflections.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
There was a whole bunch of stuff. I've got a product sheet somewhere that had maybe 20 or 30 pieces that they were constantly reordering. And we were designing new ones along the way just to keep everything fresh.
That's I so regret now not having memories of these things, because I would have loved to remember the Art of the Future piece, and then there are some of the acrylic pieces that I do remember in the stores, but there was so much stuff, and that Centaurium was such a classy store. Oh, yeah. When they opened it up, I mean,
it was all acrylic sign anyway, right?
I mean, it was. They had really interesting, this is one of the things that we always talk about, is like just how interesting and different the merchandise within the parks were, and special. And then about that time that you're talking about, that 86, 87, like all of that specialness kind of disappeared, and it went to more, generic Disney park merchandise. And I have a feeling it probably had to do with somebody retiring from that department or something, and another generation taking over.
So, Gene, before we wrap up, what other projects do you have going on that people may want to know about? Are there places they can buy some of your art or current works?
Actually, if anybody wants something, they can contact me directly. I don't sell in stores. I actually run commissions right from my studio. I just did a big thing for Philadelphia for the Avenue of the Arts that went to the governor, Ed Rendell, and the gentleman who who set up the Kimmel Center. Okay. It lights up. It's miniature buildings. It's really, really cool. I do yearly. I do probably every major broadcaster in the United States has gotten one of my 1930 glass microphones that stands about 2 feet high. I mean, if you name it in broadcasting, they've gotten it.
Wow.
So people come to me for special commissions. I do custom sailboats. I do America Cup racing boats. It's surprising what people. I've done big tables. I did an enormous glass table, 10.5 feet in diameter, held up by 3 marlins, 3 crystal marlins
Whoa.
with pure sapphires for eyes. That was a monster job. I mean, they had to put I-beams under the floor where this thing sat in a dining room, but it's beautiful. It's lit up by white lasers at night. Things magnificent looking. So these are the kinds of things. I go on eBay all the time, and when I see my stuff, I contact the seller and I tell them a little history of the piece.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool. I do all kinds of stuff. I'm somebody that doesn't waste a second. When I die, it's going to say he's totally used up.
100% spent, right?
Yes, spent, done. But I'm not there yet. So that's why I said I want to see your guys' fountain. And maybe we should talk, because I've got a couple ideas here. If you've got an interesting group of people on your podcast, we might be able to come up with some really crazy stuff.
I think that would be definitely a plan. We can continue talking. I think we can make sure that some of our reserve fountains that we've kept can make it into your hands, because if there's anybody who deserves to have one, it's definitely Eugene. I mean, the joy that fountain has brought everybody over the years, and what a symbol of the park it's become is amazing. And I think it goes without saying that so many people were inspired by it and remember it, stood in front of it for family photos and everything.
Classic.
So you really did a number on it, and it's I think everybody's amazed to hear this story. So we really appreciate the efforts and work on it.
I will hand deliver one of those to you, Gene, when the weather gets nice and the quarantine lifts.
There we go.
Absolutely.
And we even did make it light up, but I'll tell you, they're not 1,000-watt bulbs, but we did use miniature LEDs. How's that?
Well, it was funny when you were talking about that, and I was thinking, boy, today that would all be LEDs. And it wouldn't have any heat being thrown off of it.
Exactly.
No. In fact, that's what I was thinking in doing a replica of a new one, but doing it more to the action, because the ability to do it now is a lot easier than it was then. I mean, I can use CNC machines. I can use all kinds of stuff. I've got friends in China, but I think that the pores for the vertical pylons, I think I could do them in mass production right here. The quality would be so much better than if they were sent out. But I also think, like I said, with a picture plaque in the front of it, where people can slide a picture up and remember being right there at the spot, I think would be classic. It would take the people that remember it from then and the new people that get to see the new one now, and it would bring back those memories. It'd be something that we wanted to do it back then, but they were hemming and hawing and going back and forth, and it was all about money for them at the time. Now I think things may be different.
So did they ever make one as a piece of merchandise? Like, we've seen a couple at auctions that I assume were like little tests or something, but was it ever sold as an art piece?
No, I did 50 of them for them.
Okay.
And what do you call it? They kept bouncing around with it. There was all kinds of things. They were saying, well, can you light them up? And I told them what the price would be then, lighting them up, compared to what it would probably be now. And it went around and around and around and around. They wanted them smaller. They wanted them bigger. They couldn't decide. I mean, I've run into a lot of these things when you bring something artistic to a corporate setting, and you've got one or two people that don't have an awareness. I think the best thing to do is if you're going to do it, do a public survey and get a real good sense of what a customer, would think of it, rather than the corporate people trying to make that decision.
So, Gene, thank you very much for your time. Boy, the stories that you've got, you have uncovered some things. You helped us uncover things that we never knew. There is so much more to this fountain than just a hunk of plastic, so to speak. And like I said earlier, a number of people that really enjoyed that fountain and can't wait for its replica, hopefully, to be back. So you've really made a difference in a lot of people's memories and trips to EPCOT. So we thank you for that, and we really thank you for joining us tonight on this episode.
Hey, you're welcome. It's been fun. Nice meeting you guys. I'd like to meet you in
nice
person.
to meet you too. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, with that, we will be back with episode 57, and we're going to announce it now what it is. We're going to take you a trip through
south
the river
of the border.
South of the border.
Down Mexico way.
That's right. A trip through the river of time, El Rio de Tiempo. So we'll be taking you back on episode 57, which we're going to try to get out relatively soon to keep everybody who's homebound got something new to listen and look forward to. With that, we'll see you on episode 57 very shortly. And thanks for listening. And with that, Brian, take us out.
Follow the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society on Twitter and Instagram at LBVHistory and on the web at lbvhistory.org. Follow Todd McCartney and Retro WDW on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Retro WDW. For all things Retro Disney World, including exclusive merchandise, visit us on the web at retrowdw.com. On Twitter, follow our web designer Jason Bartel of Deepwater Studios at JasonDWS. Our announcer, Andre Gardner, at Andre Gardner. And follow our hosts, Hal Bowers, on Twitter and Instagram, at GoAwayGreen, and on the web at kingdomofmemories.com. For JT Kujar on Twitter, at LS1JT, on YouTube at Rubber City Motoring, and on the web at rubbercitymotoring.com. And you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, at Brian P. Miles. Retro Disney World is the monthly podcast of the Lake Buena Vista Historical Society, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, tax-exempt 501c3 organization, and is not affiliated in any way with the Walt Disney Corporation or any of its subsidiary or affiliated entities.